with that, I think we'll get started here. So once again, my name is Anthony Allen. I'm the Ecological Communications Specialist at Save the Sound. And for those of you who are less familiar or unfamiliar with Save the Sound, we're an environmental nonprofit organization that leads environmental action in the Long Island Sound region. We fight climate change, save endangered lands, protect the Sound and its rivers, and work with nature to restore ecosystems. We have four main program areas: climate, lands, healthy waters, and ecological restoration. That last one is what we're focused on today. Rain gardens are an example of green infrastructure, which is one of the things that our ecological restoration team, which Nicole and I are part of, does around New Haven and in many other places around the Long Island Sound region. And largely our ecological restoration work is doing the hands-on habitat restoration that creates lasting physical change for the benefit of both communities and wildlife. So that's sort of the frame that we're coming into this with. And I can think of no better way to introduce Nicole Davis. Nicole is our watersheds coordinator. She has been key in producing several watershed plans for us and has been integral in the rain garden program around New Haven and helping with green infrastructure work elsewhere. So without further ado, Nicole, take it away, reducing runoff one rain garden at a time.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today. For those who aren't familiar with our rain garden program, Save the Sound has done a lot of green infrastructure work in and around Connecticut and Long Island, but over the past few years, we've been focusing mainly on the West River watershed of New Haven. Oh, and hold on, my slides are not. Sorry, there's the West River and rain gardens. In 2016, Save the Sound received a 319 grant from the state in partnership with Neighborhood Housing Services to implement a pilot residential stormwater project. A lot of big projects had been going in around the country, but most of them were on public lands and not really attainable to homeowners. So the idea with the residential rain garden program was that we could take small projects and put them in people's yard to help capture stormwater, and that those small impacts could really have a high benefit in water quality. We chose to focus mainly on the New Hallville, Beaver Hills, and Dixwell neighborhoods of New Haven for a couple of reasons. The main being that they're densely developed areas with a lot of impervious cover, and they're still in active combined sewer areas. Additionally, there's a lot of properties, most of the homes are older and have downspouts that are directly connected to the sewer system. And it's going back to that idea that a cluster of small projects can really have big impacts. So in a natural area, the rainwater falls and soaks into the ground naturally. You don't have a lot of runoff, and where you do have runoff, water falls into planted areas where the roots take up water and nutrients. But in urbanized areas where you have a lot of pavement or impervious areas, stormwater washes into the storm drains, carrying pesticides, fertilizer, and anything that's on the ground, intruding trash that can really damage shellfish beds and hurt our water. So why is this important? It's really a simple thing if you think about water. Water carries everything. It falls from the sky and picks up airborne particles. It lands on the ground and picks up anything that's on the ground. And for most of us, our water just disappears into our sewer system, but everything still has a life after it goes into a storm drain. So when you see water running down the street, it's carrying, like I said before, chemicals, fertilizers, trash, road salt, sand, pieces of tire debris, garbage, cigarette butts, anything that's been carried on the ground into our storm sewers. And most storm sewers discharge directly into rivers and streams, and in this area, Long Island Sound. And in most older cities across the country, combined sewer systems were fairly common and still are fairly common. And what that means is that stormwater and sanitary sewer lines are combined. There's one pipe for all the water. So during dry weather events, that just means that the water goes to the wastewater treatment plant. But anytime there's rain or a lot of volume going into those pipes or too much for the wastewater treatment plant to handle, it simply means that it overflows directly into the water. So that means anything washed into the sewer system or anything flushed down your toilet directly goes into rivers, streams, and tributaries of Long Island Sounds. And stormwater really is one of the biggest pollutants to water quality, not just in New Haven, but all over the country. So green infrastructure kind of mimics what nature would do normally, kind of letting water soak where it falls rather than running into an artificial man-made system. Green infrastructure can include rain gardens, bioswales, pervious pavement, infiltration basins. In addition to kind of greening the area and soaking up water, it also adds vegetation where none previously existed, which can be beneficial to birds, pollinators, habitat for wildlife, and also can benefit the urban heat island effect, which if you live in a densely populated area, that's just simply where temperatures tend to be warmer where there's a lot of pavement. And so providing that shade can really be good for the people as well. So today's webinar, as the title implies, is focusing on rain gardens. And rain gardens are simply a shallow depression in the ground that are planted. They're not wet, they're not meant to hold water. They will get a little bit wet shortly after a rainfall, but the rain should drain almost instantly within a day. So it's really just a depression that's planted. And you can plant them with anything you want, from flowers to grasses to trees to shrubs. The sky's kind of the limit. And so today we're not really doing a rain garden training. This is more of a quick and dirty of what's involved in a rain garden, and then stepping you through Save the Sounds process and talking a little bit more about what we hope to do in the future. The big considerations when you're looking or thinking about putting in a rain garden is making sure that you have well-draining soil and that you're not putting any water close to the foundation of your house. And just something to keep in mind for people who are thinking about this, not every site is a good site for rain gardens. And that's how we approach almost all of our installations, not assuming that because we want to put a rain garden somewhere that it's going to be a good spot. It's about really looking at the site and making sure that it meets these criteria, that a garden will be at least 10 feet away from the foundation, so that we're not putting water where we don't want it, that we're not impacting our neighbors, and that, like I said, the soils are really well draining. If you want more resources or more information on how to do a rain garden yourself, the Yukon Clear Rain Garden Program has a lot of great tutorials and resources that are really helpful, and I would point anyone there who's kind of looking to do this on their own. So when we do a site assessment at Save the Sound, we kind of start by looking at the property holistically, kind of what does it look like, how are people using the space, how far are they from their neighbors and where their downspouts are. I tend to look at what the roof shape looks like and how it's draining to different downspouts, and then also looking at where utilities are, where the meters are. And although it's not really a fail-safe, it's usually a good idea to guesstimate where utilities might be, where underground pipes and wires are, between the street and where the utility boxes are. And another thing to look at are where our existing gardens are, trees and fences. And if there is room on the property, kind of 10 feet from the foundation and 10 feet from the neighbor's foundation, to put in a garden. And then if all of the criteria on the previous slide are met, we tend to take the property back and look at it on a computer, to just look at what the roof area looks like and what that size and the volume of water that would be coming off of the roof area is. We typically do 6-inch range gardens. And so that means the rain garden is about 1/6 of the area of the roof. So it's simply dividing the whole square footage of the roof by 6. And the ratio of rain garden to roof area tends to be the same no matter how shallow or deep you make the rain garden. So if you were going to do a 9-inch rain garden, the denominator would still be 9 and you'd do 1/9 of the roof area. And as I mentioned before, utilities are really an important constraint within a rain garden. Most buried utilities aren't as deep as one would think and are still interfered with a shallow rain garden. And so with any project, whether you're digging by hand or with an excavator, call before you dig is a great resource. I find island requests are pretty easy to file on your own and make things pretty easy. The next kind of step in our rain garden process is an infiltration test. Again, we're not building a water garden, so we want well-draining soil. So in New Haven and the southern parts of Handon, it's really a non-issue. We have so much sandy glacial outwash that water tends to just soak into the ground almost instantly. But it's as simple as digging a hole and measuring how long it takes the water to drain. What you want ideally is for the hole to drain 6 inches in 24 hours. Faster is great. Slower, you may want to think about finding another spot or moving on to another area. And then rain garden plants are a really exciting part of the process. At least this is my favorite part, is kind of figuring out what plants work best for what areas. Some of my favorites are butterfly weed and wild columbine and cardinal flowers, but almost all not almost all, but native wildflowers, shrubs, and grasses are all other options. There's shade tolerant plants that do great in a rain garden. There's trees that do great in a rain garden. So it's really whatever you're interested in planting or what people are interested in seeing on a daily basis. We try to stick with native perennials that don't mind getting their feet wet. That's kind of the rule of thumb. You don't want swamp plants, but you want plants that can handle being wet for a short period of time, but also those dry spells. Our rain gardens are kind of designed to be low maintenance, not necessarily no maintenance, but low maintenance, meaning that you don't need to water your plants every 2 days or things that are going to be finicky if they get a little too much water at once. Some other great plants that are up here are Joe Pye weed and switchgrass. We use those a lot. And the inkberry holly are something that we've used in a lot of our bioswales and in a bunch of our residential rain gardens that tend to hold up really well and have kind of a nice evergreen effect. Something to think about when you're looking at rain garden plants is how they're going to flower throughout the season. And we try to look at too what they're going to look like after they die back. Is it going to look like a bunch of shaggy sticks, or in the winter is it going to just look like a vacant hole in the ground? Which again, Yukon Clear has some great resources, and so does the University of New Hampshire. They tend to put together the rain garden list. You can select plants based on the sun availability, if you were planting a rain garden in a shady side of the yard or in a sunny spot, or things that can kind of falter in between, and also where they best belong in a rain garden. When you're thinking about kind of that shallow pit that makes a rain garden, the bottom of the rain garden tends to be a lot wetter, and the area closest to where the downspout goes in gets a lot more water a lot quicker than kind of the farther areas. So thinking about plants that can kind of handle that first deluge of water, and keeping those wetter tolerant plants closer to the wet areas. And then I don't want to say less wet tolerant because they're all pretty good, but kind of moving the plants that like having a little bit drier areas up to the sides. When we do our planting plans, we work with the homeowners, figuring out what they want to see, what works best in their yard, and how they're going to use the rain garden and their yard. We tend to, wherever possible, put together plants that are good for pollinators. This isn't necessarily part of the pollinator pathway program, but there is a lot of overlap between the plants we use and the plants that are recommended with those programs. And so there is a lot of overlap. All of our installations have been done with volunteer groups. We've had anywhere from, school groups or teams that are looking for volunteer opportunities to just individuals who want to learn more about planting rain gardens and people who just want to help out in the community. All of our rain gardens have been done in roughly 3 to 4 hours, regardless of size. So they're a lot of work, but it's a very manageable project, especially something to do over the weekends. And they can be a lot of fun. And at the end, you end up with a very scenic rain garden that can be shared with family and friends. And this is kind of a good example of how you can integrate a rain garden into your existing landscape. This homeowner didn't want to mow her lawn anymore. And so we pretty much took up her entire front yard and integrated it into a garden. So it can be something small that's kind of tucked away, or something that becomes a focal point in your yard or becomes your entire yard. We've had a lot of great success with the residential rain garden. We've had a lot of neighbors and friends that have come out and really helped move things along. We'll have neighborhood or volunteer groups that are already ready to go, and then 5 or 6 more people walking down the street show up, which has been a lot of fun. We've had some great homeowners who have really taken a chance, inviting a group of strangers to dig a hole in their front yard. So there was a lot of trust on that end, but I think most people have been pretty satisfied with what they ended up with. And last year alone, we put more than 542 plants in the ground, making 2019 our most successful rain garden season by far. We ended the year with 14 residential rain gardens and 2 edible rain gardens, both on New Haven Land Trust, who are now Gather New Haven at their community garden locations. So it was a lot of volunteer hours, a lot of manpower, and a lot of stormwater was captured kind of in that growing season alone. So what's in store for 2020? Rain garden season is upon us. You know, things are growing, things are moving, even if we're all kind of stuck on our own properties right now. Next year, we are planning 8 to 10 residential rain gardens. The first one has already been scheduled for April 30th, and we're planning 1 to 2 new edible rain gardens, hopefully. With the current coronavirus pandemic, this growing season is going to be a little bit different, and the rain garden program this year is going to look and feel a little bit different than it has in past years. The ecological restoration team has already put in place kind of policies and procedures to protect us doing field work, and they're kind of centered around keeping social distancing as a priority, and making sure that we can work safely and we can be safe with those around us. So unfortunately, that means this year we're not doing, at least for the foreseeable future, we're not doing any volunteer planting events. But that doesn't mean we're not looking for creative and new ways to involve people and volunteers and keeping everyone involved in the work that we're doing. We're really excited to see kind of how this shapes our growing season for the future. So we probably won't hit nearly as many rain gardens as we did last year, but it doesn't mean that a bunch still aren't going in. So we do hope there will be a time in the near future that we can gather again in groups. So if there are people out there who are interested in volunteering, we're still taking names and looking for opportunities. We're also still looking for 1 to 2 more rain garden sites for the current growing season. So if there's anyone out there that lives in the West River, particularly in Beaver Hills, New Hallville, or Dixville neighborhoods, or knows people that do, please email us. reducerunoff@savethesound.org is one of the best email addresses to get a hold of everyone. It goes out to several folks on the ecological restoration team, so you tend to get the best response. And it also, beyond the volunteers that have been involved in this program, it really has been a Save the Sound wide effort. The ecological restoration team, I think everyone on the team has been involved in the rain garden program in one way or another. We've all installed at least 4 or 5 rain gardens, if not more. We even got the communications team and development team out to do a rain garden on their own, which was a lot of fun. And they've been great at making sure people know what's going on and keeping people informed, and keeping us looking good, which is really important too. So we'll find a way to get through this and to keep people involved and to keep getting gardens going in the ground. So I guess that was kind of a quick whirlwind presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions or provide any other information that people might have.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Nicole Davis, everyone. That was really great. That's probably the most thorough 15-20 minute overview of rain gardens that you'll get. I did post some additional resources in the chat, some of the things that Nicole was mentioning, and we're getting some good questions through the chat as well. So just a reminder to everyone on the line here, if you do have a question for Nicole, feel free to post that into chat. So we'll get started with a couple of these here. The first one was one that we get fairly often, I would say, which, and it's a great question, which is, what's the specific difference between rain gardens and bioswales?
The simple answer is the depth. So bioswales, like I had already said, it's just a shallow depression in the ground. So if you're working somewhere that already has well-drained soil, it's really just a matter of turning the soil to loosen it up and digging a short hole. Whereas bioswales tend to be deeper and designed to capture a lot more stormwater in a much smaller area. So the depth of most bioswales is closer to 5 feet, and they tend to have layers of gravel and gabions in there to kind of maximize the amount of infiltration volume. followed by a layer of soil and growing medium that can still kind of help that water move down before it's planted.
Great, yeah. Okay, next question. Should the plants chosen for a rain garden, should they be facultative? I think we're referring here to, you know, the light conditions and whether they can deal with long periods of darkness or shade.
That honestly, it depends on the plants. There are plants that will do well in shorter light conditions and really high shade areas. There's plants that will only flower or do well in full sun. So it really depends on the species of plant. And plants can really be, like I said, we tend to use native wildflowers, but there's plants that are wetland plants that are made to grow in areas with shorter daylight or darker periods or with dense overstories. So it's really just selecting the plants that are best to grow in the location that the garden's going in. And one way you can kind of figure that out is kind of just put a stick in the ground, kind of where you were interested in putting a rain garden and watching how the sun tracks. If it's shaded for most of the time, then you know that you want plants that are more shade tolerant. Whereas you can do, if it's sunny or you know that it's sunny all day long, you can select plants that way. And there's plants for in-between conditions as well. And most native New England plants are designed for our, typical light periods during the growing season.
Yeah, and we're getting some folks chiming in on the chat. Thank you for this, everyone. Nicole did mention earlier we're looking for plants with wet feet, or the ability to have wet feet, so they can deal with heavy rainfall and pools of water, but they don't need that much liquid. They can also exist and survive in dry conditions as well. So yeah, that's a key factor to look for when doing plant selection. Let's see, there's some interesting specific questions here. Will milkweed carry toxins from the water into monarch larvae that use these as a host plant?
That is a great question. There is a lot of research into that, and I can't speak specifically about toxins and how they carry from the flower into monarch larvae. But most residential rain gardens are coming from roof areas, not necessarily from streets. Not that they can't. And so uptake is still an issue. You still have metals moving into leaves and flowers. But the research I've seen shows that most of the chemical compounds in plants are either clustered around the roots, kind of heavy metals don't move all the way up the stalk, or that they're taken in by the leaves. So the flowers, although they do still carry contaminants, aren't as contaminated as the roots. So I think it's more thinking about how the type of water you're putting in there. But I think actually, I'm not even going to say that. I was going to say it is something to be considered, and I don't have enough research to say yes or no.
Yeah, it's always fair to say we don't know, but we can look into that. That's something that we think a lot about with edible rain gardens too, the uptake and how that affects different species of plants. And we rely on some really great research from folks at Cornell and elsewhere when we do that work. So it's out there. Okay, let's see. Just really quickly, we've had a question or two about where we're doing this work. Right now, the grant that we have to do rain gardens, to install rain gardens, is a state 319 grant that is confined to the West River area of New Haven. So New Hallville and Beaver Hills neighborhoods here in New Haven. That said, there are folks doing rain gardens and installing rain gardens around Connecticut and around New York. If you want to do this yourself, that's also something you can do. I would point you toward some of the resources I posted in the chat here from NEMO at UConn and UNH. There's a lot of information out there that's just really accessible and really easy to access for guidance. And, you know, if you have questions along the way, or, you know, you just want to reach out and show us the pictures of the rain garden you installed, by all means, please do. Reduce runoff at savethesound.org would be a great one. And yeah, someone just posted the Peconic Estuary program might be able to help with installations on the North Fork of Long Island bayscaping program. So thank you for that. And here's a good one from Ann. Do you have to water a rain garden in drought conditions?
It depends on how extensive the drought is. You know, if it's been a few months and your plants are starting to look a little wilty, then absolutely. And for that first kind of few months when the plants are still establishing themselves, watering them on a semi-regular basis is a good idea, just to help, you know, the plant roots develop. But the idea is that in a normal summer, we'll have a big heavy rain and it'll be a few weeks in between rainstorms, and the plants should be fine in between them. But if the garden starts to look stressed, it's always a good idea to water.
Yeah. Low maintenance, not no maintenance.
Yep.
That's a great question. Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
Do
okay,
we
sorry.
have any advice for encouraging other municipalities to install rain gardens around public storm drains, like in New Haven? Have the results from those rain gardens in New Haven been good? Quickly, I'll say one thing about that. What you'll see a lot around New Haven is bioswales. There's more than 200 of those installed around the city, with another 70 or so planned at this point. Those are the ones you'll see right on the curb, right sort of before the storm drains. And that is a slightly different solution, as Nicole was talking about. New Haven is really a national leader in that program, and they work really, really well here. They have been super successful, in large part because of the drainage rates we have here. Our sandy soil means, you know, Nicole was saying, I think it was, you're looking for a minimum drainage of, or infiltration of 6 inches per 24 hours. We've had many, many, many times that recorded here in New Haven. So they've been working really well. But Nicole, do you have any advice for working with municipalities to advocate for green infrastructure?
Yeah, I think honestly, the best thing they can do is hear from you, you know, talking to your legislative body as someone who lives there. If they're hearing feedback from the people who live in the community that that's something they're interested in seeing, I think they're more receptive. The Yukon Clear and CT NEMO program are focused on using non-point education for municipal officials, is what the acronym stands for. So they do a lot of outreach with different boards and commissions within the communities across the state. And we did a rain garden training for a number of communities working with the Regional Planning Agency over the summer. And I think the thing we heard from the most coming out of the people from the municipalities that were there was that they're concerned about maintenance long-term. So I think if there's a group that's willing to step up and say that we're willing to kind of take on this rain garden, you know, kind of the weeding and maintenance and mulching or helping out, that's something that I think would definitely make them more receptive. And if it's something you're willing to do, they don't know that unless you tell them.
Yeah, definitely raise the voices.
Yep, and with the new MS4 requirements and the state permit, I think a lot more municipalities are becoming more receptive to using green infrastructure. And so hopefully, as we kind of find more funding for those types of projects, they'll be more receptive than just kind of taking that standard grayscale business as usual approach.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so thank you everyone again for joining us. Thank you, Nicole. very much, Nicole Davis, for giving us this great set of resources and an overview of rain gardens. So hope everyone is staying healthy, staying safe, and we'll see you at the next webinar, which I believe is next month, but stay tuned because we're trying to get more of these going. All right, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks, Anthony.
Take care.